Breathe in. And now, let it out. Blow out all that irritation and pent-up frustration. That's it. And another deep breath. Let it fill your chest balloons with radiance and love. And again, breathe out. Feeling any toxic energy leave through the hole at the bottom of your face. Let a wave of euphoria wash over you. Okay. I think you're probably just about ready to listen to another episode of the Failing Writers Podcast.
Tommy!
John!
We haven't spoken for like 2 weeks or something.
No.
I think that's the longest period of time. We haven't spoken for about 3 years.
I know, it's been great, hasn't it?
It's the power of bi-weekly episodes, not having to talk to each other.
Yeah, lots better.
Yeah,
Then we can
better.
just keep our pretense of being friends. I find it much easier when we're just doing it occasionally
Yeah,
on the
that's right.
podcast.
Yeah.
I find it very difficult face-to-face to maintain that idea that we get on
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I like you and stuff.
It's a real problem.
The banter, all that business. Oh, me and my mate John. Yeah, no, it's easier when we just, I quite liked it.
Thanks, Tommy. Thank you. Hey, I've got a little funny for you, Tom.
Have you?
Yeah, I don't know.
First time for everything.
Yay. I don't know, you might have heard this already, but
Yeah.
apparently, we've talked about ChatGPT on this show several times, but apparently in France, whenever ChatGPT is discussed on like a serious discussion show or on the radio, there's often at least one person who giggles at every mention of it. And the reason is because if you say ChatGPT in France, you obviously pronounce it ChatGPT. But said aloud, that sounds exactly like cat, I farted. Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
Hey, before we go any further,
Yeah.
we should remind people that in the next episode that will be going out on Christmas Day, we will be gathering around the fire, won't we, for a special traditional Victorian Christmas ghost story telling.
Yeah, and we were wanting people to send in their ghost stories so we could share them with the podcast listening community that we built.
I was going to say the world,
Yeah.
but yeah, you're right. It's not that many people, is it? It's a lot less than the world.
I mean, all the world is welcome.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you never know.
Send it to failingwriterspodcast@gmail.com and and your story might appear on the podcast.
Yeah, something spooky, something Christmassy would be good. Doesn't have to be. Maybe that little touch of Victoriana in there would be nice. But
Yeah,
Well,
doesn't have to be.
no,
yeah.
we're pretty easy, but that would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So your deadline
Yeah.
is the 16th of December.
And what we're saying, sort of under 1,000 words ish,
Yeah.
aren't we? So we can
You know.
so we can read a lot out. Really.
Exactly. Unless that misses off the entire point of it.
Yeah, don't write a really good story and then go, oh, that's 1,000 words. So at the end it just goes, and then and then the extra 20 words. We're going to tell you what happened.
And if you want some inspiration, worth having a listen to our Halloween episode where we talk to spookologists. I think we're calling
Yes, some very good ghost writing tips. Ghost story writing tips, not ghost writing. That's a different thing.
It's an entirely different thing. So there you go. I think that's that business taken care of.
Yeah.
Oh,
What?
no. One last thing we should mention. We should tease ahead, Tom, because I'm almost certain that our listeners will be very eager, if not desperate, to find out whether our vow to each other, which we sanctified by rubbing noses, has been kept or not. Would you like to remind people what that was?
You decided, because you couldn't quite be bothered to do NaNoWriMo, that we should finish the draft of our manuscripts that we were working on by the end of November, which has now passed.
Yes, it has. And so we could reveal, because we don't know how each other have done.
Because we've not been talking to each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we can reveal that at the end of the show. We'll leave them hanging. How about
that'd be good. That'd give me sort of an hour to
bang out a few words.
Bang out a few thousand words. So who is on the show? What is the intervening content, John, between then and now?
Well, we've got a lovely thing for you. We have Alec Worley, who is a man who has the best way of describing it, he's really studied his craft. He's a well-established, a very well-respected fantasy and horror writer, mainly comics writer. But he's written a novel, he's written lots of film articles.
Yeah.
He's got credits writing for Star Wars, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Judge Dredd, and comics for John Carpenter.
He's like his own 12-year-old self's dream, isn't he?
He is, yeah. So I was involved in an audio drama just before COVID, which was produced by Games Workshop's Black Library, who produce all the Warhammer audiobooks. And it was very good fun. I was working with like 5 other actors, and I was playing this kind of little hobbity halfling character.
Is that because your feet? Is that why you got that?
I was kneeling down the whole time.
Right.
I was a rattling called Baggett, and it struck me as we were performing this little piece just how well constructed the story was, and how funny the dialogue was, and how well the themes were worked out.
He's saying all the right things here, isn't he?
And I was impressed with the writing. I thought it would be very nice to try and track down the writer, have a little natter with them about how they honed their craft. And so I did. And that is why Alec Worley is here with us now. Hello, Alec.
Watcha, how you doing?
Yeah, very good, thanks. So that audio drama, which was called Dredge Runners,
yeah,
I think was an example of it. It was just a really tidy bit of writing. It's only an hour long. But yeah, tell us about that, first of all. How did that come about? Was it like a commission, or had you written it on spec?
No, that was I had an idea for the 2 characters. I wanted to do this kind of sort of classic double act sort of thing, sort of Dylan Rodney, Wallace and Gromit kind of Asterix and Obelix type sort of double act. And didn't really know what to do with it. And then Nick Kime, the managing editor at Black Library, said that they were going to do this Warhammer Crime, and I'd done some Judge Dredd and Judge Anderson stuff before. He said, would I like to take a shot at it? And I said, well, I've got a great idea for these 2, just put them in. So and just got the commission there and worked it through, and he helped an awful lot in sort of putting it together. I think it was like it wasn't my first. I've done a few other audios, but this was the first time we'd done anything kind of in that world. So there was a lot of kind of thinking through as to how it would all work, in how you would kind of put all the crime scenario into the Warhammer universe and stuff. But yeah, it seemed to sort of go down well. And your because I did a novel after that, and your reading of the character was totally what was in my head when I was writing the novel. So I was reading out his lines in his accent and making sure it all worked totally. So yeah, that was kind of I guess partially inspired by your lovely performance as well.
Oh, well, that's nice to hear. That's nice to hear. Yeah, so tell us about the follow-up. Was that your first novel?
Yes, that was that was quite scary, because it was bang in the middle of COVID, and because I work in comics as well, and a lot of the other jobs had just everything had just shut up shop, and it got a little bit scary for a while. And I literally had nothing else to do, and I was like, well, now's probably the best time to have a crack at a novel. And yeah, I went and did it, and it was great. I had nothing else on. I wasn't chasing anything else, because this is always the thing when you're freelancing, is like you're juggling so many other things.
Yeah.
And this was so nice to just be able to focus on this one thing and just be so involved in that world for how many months. And I'm still bloody slow in writing it, but too slow.
So how long did that take you then?
In total, because what I do is I log my hours every day.
Oh, right.
On every project. So what I'll do, like this morning, I had 3 hours fielding other stuff. So I had pages coming in from some other comics bits, some admin paperwork I had to do. So that was my 3 hours. And then everything I do on any story, like if I'm doing breakdowns on a comic, I'll log how many hours out. So having done this for like 10, 15 years now, I've got a fairly reliable metric of how long it will take me to do any kind of project. So if you want a 10-page comic out of me, I can tell you pretty much how long it's going to take me. But prose was a little bit of a different thing, and it took me in total, all in, about 9 months on about 5 hours a day.
See, that's still pretty good, I think.
Oh, it's not.
Is it not? But for your first novel, I think that's
all right.
I think that's very good. And how did you find the writing of it? Did you write it in the same way you'd write anything else? What was your process? Was it different to what it normally?
Because he couldn't go, I'll just leave that bit. I'll tell him to draw that in.
Oh yeah. Do you know what? That's the thing with comics. That's the thing, and I've got in trouble for saying this before. I really like you're right. You're working on comics. Comics is the artist medium, all right? You are doing 20% of the entire job or 30% of the entire job, and the rest is all on the shoulders of the artist. So you see all these guys swanning around, I'm a graphic novelist, darling. Oh, bollocks. Like, you do 30% of the job, and the artist does the rest. They have the lion's share. They do the most amount of work. But anyway, when you're doing prose, it's all on you. It's all on you. It's like, I think there's different media. I know they say, I think I've read somewhere that, stage is the actor's medium. It's like that is the one that will allow an actor to kind of show off everything they can do, their body, their voice, their everything. Yeah. And I think fiction is the writer's medium. It's where the entire burden of everything is on your shoulders. And it lives or dies on you. You can't blame anyone else. It's not like in comics where you can get a great artist on it and they'll just cover up all the mistakes you've done because they're so great.
So the spotlight was suddenly on you. There was nowhere to hide. Yeah,
exactly. So it was kind of very carefully plotted and very kind of cautiously sort of set out. And it was an absolute joy to write, to be honest. And then off it went. And then you jumped onto a bunch of other stuff. And then you're just kind of, in 4 months' time, I've completely forgotten anything that happened in it. And then you get the notes through, and you're like, "What's this again?" And you got to read the whole thing again. I don't even remember writing this. This is because you've lived sort of 3 other lives in between coming back to this story. I've gone and done this story or that story, and then I'm guessing you must be the same with roles.
I mean, it's a little bit different. No, you tend to do one thing at a time, really, but it happens quite quickly. It's not like when you're writing, you could have, several projects on at the same time. Yeah. I don't really know how you do you. So how many projects might you have on simultaneously?
It depends because it's like there's this phenomena that I call Schrodinger's scheduling. You've heard of like the thing about the cat in the box that's both dead and alive. The freelancer's schedule is both full and empty at the same time, and you have to plan. So you can't pitch too many projects to different people, because if they all come in positive,
they might all say yes.
Then you're stuffed, and you've got to turn half of them down, which you don't want to do. So you've got to kind of take just too many so that you can, if you went full pelt, you could maybe just about do them.
Yeah, you would make a terrible plasterer or builder or plumber.
Oh, jeez,
because that's not what you do if you do that.
No.
If you do that, you put all that out there and just ignore them when they come back to you if you're busy.
Yeah, exactly. So, you
can't do that in the real world.
No, or just make them so expensive.
Yes,
no one can afford it. Yeah,
this is it. So it's a constant juggle between you kind of looking at the stuff that's kind of short term but slightly higher income, and then you've got the longer term that's and you just weigh it all up that way. And then as you go on in your career, certainly in my career, you just look at what's the best people to work for. Are these ones going to let you keep the rights to the stuff that you do? Are these ones going to give you royalties? Yeah. Are these ones nice to work with? How and all? And you figure all this out. There was a time I was at a comics convention in Bristol, and one of the first ones I went to, I met Staz Johnson, who was this great comic artist. I worked with him on a Future Shot for 2000 AD, and he was scribbling away, and I got talking to him, and he was just this northern lad. He's lovely. He was just like completely down the line, and he said, "You know what? I'm here as like a Marvel artist." He goes, "But I haven't drawn Iron Man for bloody years." He goes, "The majority of my money I made this year was a job, a corporate job I did for this, that, and the other," and he says like. But that's the difference. Like you don't really talk about that stuff. You're here as a comics artist, but no one's seeing all the other stuff that you're doing kind of bit below the surface. And I think talking about when I first started out, I think my biggest mistake I made, and I think it's something that a lot of people make, is when you model your career on those who came before you. And I did a post on this on my newsletter thing about why writers are full of shit and why they have to be. And the example I gave was I was doing a prose novella, and I thought, right, what I'm going to do with this, because I was a bit nervous about doing it. And I was like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a journal. So at the end of every day, I'm just going to scribble into it, and it's going to be all my frustrations, all my everything, all my worries about this.
Get it all out.
Just get it all out. And then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to publish it. I'm not even going to rewrite. I'm just going to take a photograph of the page so it's completely unfiltered, and I'm going to publish that and blah, blah, blah. And I managed about 3 entries before I realised I could never show this to anybody. And the reason being, because prospective editors don't want to see you worrying about hitting a deadline. They want to know that you can hit the deadline. So you have to put up this front. You have to put up this front of competence that, you know, everything's fine. You're like Chris Christopherson in Convoy, you know, was it smooth on top and paddle like the devil underneath? And it's the same thing with the punters as well, with the readers. It's like, there's this great quote I found from, I think it was Lemmy, when he said, when you go and see a concert, you don't want to see the man next door on stage. You want to see the being from another planet. You want to see Ziggy Stardust. You want to see Elton John. You don't want to see anybody ordinary. And so what happens is you have to present that brand, if you like, that brand identity, whatever. But for people coming into writing, they could be modeling themselves on a model that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
That not only doesn't exist, could never exist. You're kind of taking that quest to get to a destination, to a place that doesn't even exist. It can't. And this is exactly what happened with me when I started out. I ended up in film journalism. I was I messed up at school, spent a year on the dole, just terrified that I'd messed everything up and all the rest of it. Wanted to be a filmmaker, but I couldn't afford film school, and I had loans and stuff. I had no bloody idea. Like, my mum worked in BHS. None of my family had ever been to uni, so I had no idea about any of this stuff. And I got a job as a projectionist in Odeon West End, and I'd landed a making of The Evil Dead, the first Evil Dead movie, in Shivers magazine, and the editor had rung me up and told me he was so happy with it that this is going to go on the cover, and you could do anything else. So I literally just went, right, I'm now a freelance writer. Right? So I just quit. I quit what I was doing, and it was just the most dumb thing I could ever have done, because I had no idea what I was doing, no contacts, no nothing, no clue what I was doing. But I was kind of eking out some form of income from writing film reviews. I was in Sight and Sound, I was in Nuts and Zoo, I think, for a little while.
Right.
And it was trying to figure out how to make a living out of that. And what I was looking at film journalists or film critics that I loved, guys like Kim Newman, and thinking, well, they must make a living because look, they're doing this and they must be getting by. But it's the same thing as with when you're looking up to authors. What the author isn't going to be telling you is all the corporate copywriting that they're doing that doesn't get talked about in the interviews, and all the other stuff they have to. They won't tell you if their partner's a solicitor or something, you know, and they've got money. That was the big mistake I made, was kind of falling for the necessary BS that authors and writers have got to kind of present to the world, sort of thing.
That's really worrying, because we're all out there, Tommy and I. So that makes me think it's going to be really hard for us to become, you know, like proper writers now.
What do you mean?
Yeah, because you could just listen to this podcast, and you know who we really are.
We've got nothing to hide behind.
Yeah, we've blown it.
We've blown our cover before we started.
Yeah, exactly. We'll never be taken seriously now.
But you know what? I think as we go on, I've got this whole theory, like with AI and everything. I really think that there is going to be more value placed on genuine authenticity, on people who, you know, you're showing the cracks and you're showing the humanity and you're showing the vulnerability, and you're kind of following people, because I follow this podcast because I like listening to you. You know, I like your personalities and I like the things you come out with, and the guests that you have on. It's kind of, that's real. That's not some kind of branded corporate nonsense. That's why, you know, I follow you, sort of thing. I think my whole thing about putting that little journal down was just kind of like, this is what I wanted to read when I was coming into the business.
Yeah.
And just kind of knowing that I'm probably not doing things as badly as I think I am, you know, and just having that verified by someone else out there, rather than having to sort of figure it out for yourself after trial and error sort of thing.
Well, that was a very ballsy move, but it seems to have worked out for you. Was it as kind of easy a move as you're making it sound? Did you hit a few stumbling blocks on the way when you were doing your early journalism?
Nothing but stumbling blocks. I mean, it wasn't a ballsy move. It was idiotic move. It was absolute. I mean, seriously stupid. I mean, to look now at my wife like, what? You shouldn't have supported me. You should have told me. You should have given me 6 months and just told me to find something else. This was nuts. But it was. It is. I think it's like the myth of breaking in as well, because I ended up doing a film book, which I was really proud of. It was a book on fantasy cinema, not horror or sci-fi, but specifically fantasy. Everything from sort of epic fantasy from Lord of the Rings, which was just coming out at the time, to sort of Conan the Barbarian, heroic fantasy, to It's a Wonderful Life, like earthbound fantasy, and then Edward Scissorhands and Wizard of Oz, sort of fairy tale stuff. And I thought after I'd done that, I thought, this is great. Every door is going to open to me now. And it doesn't. No one gives a shit. So it's just, you might get some sort of other smaller doors would open, but the notion of there's some kind of door, like people constantly talk about breaking into comics.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's no such thing. There's not this door where you just open it and suddenly there's this Willy Wonka kind of land where everything I can just prance among the trees, kind of plucking jobs at the tree.
But I think it goes back to what you were saying before, though, Alec, about people's desire to put up this sort of facade of what it's like. And once they get past that point of having the first big contract or the first, where you can put a big name to it or something, and they kind of play along with this. Oh, yeah. Well, I was doing this stuff for such and such the other day.
But it's like you have to. I think this is the thing, you have to, especially now, especially when things like, I was reading something the other day where somebody made the point about, I think it was in the Atlantic, it was talking about the evolution of the perception of an artist. Like back in the days of Shakespeare, he was a playwright in the same way that you had a cartwright or they were an artisan. And then the Romantics came along and you had this idea of the artist as this kind of mystic hermit that went off and kind of made crazy magic. And then today, there was this great line where she said, today creators are more concerned, rather than having their 10,000 hours in which they hone their craft, they're after 10,000 followers. And so you kind of end up with a lot of people maybe sacrificing the time that they could have spent honing their craft, because that's how you get work, is by getting good. There was Andy Diggle, the comics writer, said this at a convention I remember once, and it was just a brilliant bit of advice. He says, you get in by getting good. You get so good because there are so many, he didn't say this, but because there's so many bullshitters out there, that if you do know what you're doing, any editor worth their salt will recognize that and will take you seriously. And I think as well, it was like when I was a projectionist, the chap who trained me up said, you've got to know what you're doing with these machines. This was back in the days of 35mm. It was these great big kind of things the size of like Death Star cannons that kind of fired this beam out of a little porthole. He would just say, you need to know what you're doing. You need to understand this, understand that. He goes, because if it breaks down, then you need to know what you're doing. And he says, that's what will get you out of trouble. So I think I've always had that very mechanical mindset anyway, because I mean, my family have always been like, sort of mechanics or electricians. Even though I am an utterly useless human being, that mechanical mindset has served me quite well when it comes to kind of understanding stories and learning how these things get put together, if that makes sense.
I wonder how much the job of a projectionist has changed. How long ago was it that you were doing that?
I finished in 2000, but that was it's all gone digital now. I think there was
still a sort of romantic job back then.
Apparently, like when it first started, it was the job that you gave to servicemen coming back from World War I who were hideously disfigured, because
put them in the little dark room.
Yeah, where no one could see them.
Anyone.
But yeah, that was a very strange job, working in very strange old West End buildings, full of ghostly goings on, and
watching the same film over and over again.
Over and over again. Yeah. Do you remember back in the old films where, certainly before digital, when you had the little circle would appear in the top right hand corner every now and again?
Yeah.
Those are your cue dots.
Yeah.
So what you would do is you'd have 20-minute reels on two machines. And when the first dot came up, you started the second machine. And when the second dot came over, you went click, clack, clunk, and you shunked it over to the second machine. And then you unspooled the other one and round it all up. So it was proper like old school 35mm up to your knees in coils of film and sellotape, all in the dark, going slowly mad.
Probably quite good for studying story and studying beats. Seeing films over and over again.
Do you know what it is, though? I think there's been two kind of moments in my life, I think, that have totally helped me understand stories. And one was when I was a teenager watching on my VHS collection, when I would you'd tape stuff off the TV, or you'd get those double-decker VHS recorders where you'd buy stuff from, you'd get stuff from Blockbuster, tape it. So I had umpteen different cuts of like Dawn of the Dead, but there'd be like this canon of movies, John Carpenter, James Cameron, all this stuff that you would just watch over and over and over and over and over again. So then when I actually sort of studied film and storytelling under my own steam, a lot of those examples were coming to mind as, it's like that bit in Terminator when this happened. So that kind of, it's just kind of like an encyclopedia of techniques and stuff. And then again, when my daughter was very little and she was watching tons of like new wave Disney, like Frozen and Tangled and Kung Fu Panda, and I was watching this over and over and over again and realizing how brilliantly these stories are told. I wasn't sort of Stockholm syndrome, but I genuinely do think that Kung Fu Panda is a masterpiece. It is.
I would agree with that, definitely.
It is a brilliant film. And then just listening to sort of screenwriting podcasts and stuff, and just kind of soaking it all in as you go along. But the thing with like learning all this stuff yourself and teaching yourself is you kind of never have that what's the word? Because you haven't got a teacher to kind of tell you whether you're going wrong or not. You can just, again, you just end up going trial and error. Does this work? I don't really know.
It's like intuition.
Yeah, you just kind of build up your own sort of intuition in this stuff.
What about in terms of sort of the seeds of ideas for stories? I guess a lot of your stuff that you do is driven by existing universes and almost existing storylines. What's the balance between stuff where you're kind of completely originating stuff versus taking something along as a...
It's kind of 50-50 really, because I mean, I've worked on a lot of IP. Like I've worked on, I hate that term IP, but like I've worked on things like Warhammer, Judge Dredd, Star Wars, lots of 2000 AD characters. And you're kind of looking at what makes those stories work, and it then just becomes like a logic game. You're just working out, okay, what kind of story would work well in this space? But then there's other times when you're doing original stuff. Like I stood at the traffic lights in Brixton High Street waiting for the lights to change, and this breakdown truck went past, and it had this super posh BMW on the back, and in the cab there was like a sort of clearly sort of working class black guy in like overalls who was driving, and there was this kind of city boy on his phone chatting away. And I thought, what would happen if those two broke down? Like, what conversations would they have? How would that work? And then that just kind of, and I thought, what if they broke down on a haunted road? What if they had to work together to get out of this? And then that kind of seeds sort of space. So you write it down and you scribble it away and you put it in my little sort of cigar box where all the ideas go. And then when it comes the time to sort of pitch an original story, like I did with the John Carpenter comics, I was like, I want to pitch this now. So then you kind of dust it out and you work it out. But I mean, a lot of the time it's just you'll kind of have a cool idea, and then it's just a case of asking questions. Okay, who would be the best person to put in that situation? What kind of arc would they have? What would be a good setting? Why would it do this? So I'll just have like an A4 notebook, and I'll literally, because for me it works better if I'm writing it out, because then I can trace back my thinking, right? Because if I'm thinking it in my head, it just evaporates. Whereas if I'm writing it on a thing, I could just follow it back. So I'll just write all these notes, and it's constantly just asking questions. But why? But why? But who? But when? But where? But why? Until you've kind of exhausted every question. And then I just go back through all these notes with a highlighter pen and just circle all the bits that I need. And then that just kind of all gets put into a pitch. I do use a kind of modified version of some of these plot paradigms like Save the Cat and stuff, which I think I do think are useful, but they're editorial tools rather than creative tools. And I think with
they're at the last stage sort of thing.
Yeah, they're kind of
just
like,
to hone it a bit.
You just need this kind of thing just to see where your pacing is, and then you put it away and you forget about it. But I think over the years I've internalized so much of this. I kind of know where the act breaks need to be and where this should generally be going, and I'll only really go back to it if I feel like it's sticking at some point. But I totally understand like why paradigms like that, why there's this whole industry of all these paradigms. It's because they're so appealing, I think, especially to younger or more inexperienced writers, is because you just don't know how to bridge the gulf between beginning and end. And these give you that, or these at least give you the illusion of like holding your hand. And I mean, I think in the first Save the Cat book, he even sort of says, you know, it's like you just put your idea here, you crank the handle and it comes out the other end. It's like, no. It doesn't work like that. I mean, you that's too mechanical. You're trying to, for me anyway, it's like you're trying to make that balance between something that doesn't feel too mechanical, that's got that kind of underlying structure, but at the same time feels alive, because plot and character are basically two sides of the same coin. If you've got a plot, you're asking questions about, okay, why would they do this? Why would they be on this journey? What's motivating them? What are they going to get out of it? And that's giving you a character. And similarly, on the flip side, you've got a character that's saying, well, one character does something, which causes another character to do something, which causes another character to react this way. And that's your plot. You're just going from boom, 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 boom along. So they are literally, they are indivisible. They're the same thing. And I think in learning story structure, mainly from screenwriting books, because that's probably the best place to learn structure, is because character and plot, I think, tend to be kind of separated because you need to talk about them. But thinking about them and putting them into practice, it's like they are just indivisible. And it's just, it all needs to kind of come together in a quite organic way, which is very difficult when you're starting out because you haven't found the rhythm yet. So you're kind of clunking a little bit. And that's kind of why the temptation comes about to sort of lean on these paradigms, I think.
It sounds from what you're saying like you don't mind when you're working for a company like Warhammer or you're writing for a comic. It doesn't really make much difference if you're writing under a kind of restriction. By that I mean because you've got to write in that genre about that world with these characters. Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
because I think restrictions, it then becomes a bit of a game of like how much can you do with, you know, within these boundaries. And I think for me it's just finding the emotional center and just making the reader feel something and just kind of bring it alive, or just kind of asking questions of a character. But on the flip side, if it's a long-standing thing, sometimes some of the hardcore fans don't want you asking questions about sort of a cherished character. In fact, we'll get quite angry when you start asking questions about about certain characters, and you sort of
like about their motivation or.
Well, it's things like so. For example, there was a character me and artist Ben Wilshire did for 2000 AD, Durham Red. So she's if you remember, I don't know if you guys ever read 2000 years ago or currently.
Dave's our 2000 guy, but he's not here tonight, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Well, so it's been going since sort of 77. It's a sort of weekly anthology comic. You've got Judge Dredd in there. You've got Strontium Dog, who was this kind of spaghetti western bounty hunter, mutant guy, and all these other stories. Rogue Trooper, which is kind of this genetically altered GI. And there was a character in Strontium Dog called Durham Red, who was this, back in the 80s she came about. She was this bounty hunting mutant vampire. And in the 80s, you kind of had sort of very 80s versions of this character. And it was literally just kind of fun, spaghetti western, slightly silly, but just kind of fun. And then in the 90s, there was a kind of far future sequel that was done with her, where she kind of woke up in the future. And it was a little bit more serious and a little bit more kind of sexy. And then in the one that we did recently, I said, all right, let's take her kind of back to the middle period of this and just, okay, so she's a vampire. How does she feel about killing people? Because she has to kill people in order to survive. So how does she maintain a moral compass? Because she will have done terrible things in order to survive. And
like everyone else tried to justify why she was doing it.
Exactly. So it's kind of like, it's that if you've ever seen, there's a great show on, things on Disney Plus now called Mr. In Between.
Oh, no.
Oh, it's brilliant. It's about this freelance criminal who is doing exactly that, trying to kind of maintain this moral kind of equilibrium. So I kind of wanted to talk about that, but there's not been many. The Durham Red's gone down okay, but there's one or two guys who are kind of like, no, I want it to read like it read when I was 9. It's like you're trying to explain that you're older now and storytelling has changed now, and you can't really go back to what that was now because everything's changed. It's a different everything's changed, you know. But yeah, by and large, that one's gone down good.
But I mean, fans do get very defensive over their canon, don't they? As well, there's a responsibility, or if you're mischievous, an opportunity to not annoy people or annoy people. Do you know, by like you say, pushing the boundaries a bit, or God, the second batch of Star Wars films and the flack that George Lucas got for those about doing, and you think, well, he's made them up. They're made up. Everything's made up. You can't say that can't happen because it's all made up.
Exactly. He made it. The thing is, I mean, there's a lot of comics creators, I think, who I feel do get a little bit haughty about fanboy entitlement. Well, quite frankly, mate, they are paying for the comic.
Yeah, that's why it all exists.
So it's a bit of 50-50, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you don't just take the piss. But at the same time, I think creators should have license enough to kind of try new things with them, and there needs to be that kind of
challenge the audience a bit, challenge the reader.
There needs to be a bit of generosity and a bit of give and take on both sides, I think, and rather than just kind of well, if you don't like this, then it's like no, don't be like that, because at the end of the day, they're paying $5 for a book, and they are entitled to be entertained. Because they've paid for it. Yeah. So I think my feeling with when you're working on IP is just it's going back and just figuring out what made the character work, or at least how did it make you, like when I was working on Star Wars, I did some original Star Wars Rebel stuff, and it was just kind of what's my gut here with the story? What do I want to get across? It's about exploration and this pseudo family and this kind of house ship whizzing around having adventures. It's like when Spielberg did Raiders of the Lost Ark. He wasn't specifically trying to remake all the serials that he saw as a kid, but he was trying to make something that would give the viewer the same feeling that he had when he was a kid.
That's it, isn't it?
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of whatever genre you're working in, even though sort of fantasy, horror, sci-fi, they do operate differently from other types of stories. Essentially, what you're looking at is an emotional core that you're the writer. You're trying to find something that's going to make the audience feel. Like a great example, was the movie 28 Days Later. Full pelt horror movie. I haven't seen that movie in 10 years. I've only seen it once. Great film, but the scene that stays with me over how many years it was I've seen it is not the blood and gore scenes. It's not the chase bits. It's not the jump scares. It's the bit when Cillian Murphy goes back to his parents' house and finds them dead on the bed. Do you remember that scene?
Yeah.
It's and they've been dead a while, and you look and you see the sleeping pills and the empty glass of wine, and they're clutching a photo of their son, and it's an absolute emotional sledgehammer moment, and it's just, oh my God, it's devastating. That's the stuff that Aliens is another example. I've always felt that the reason Aliens work so well is, even though it's one of the greatest action movies ever made, it's kind of rollicking monsters popping out the walls every 5 seconds. The emotional core of that, it is about a woman who was promised a frightened child that she will protect her from the monsters. And it's that is so primal. Who hasn't been a frightened child or a parent? And there's, for me, one of the most anchoring moments in that movie that really sells that is the shot when Sigourney Weaver is going on the elevator down to finally confront the Queen and get Newt back. And there's this close-up of Sigourney Weaver's face. And because she's such a brilliant actress, you can just read the emotions on her face. And she's like, I'm going to die. But I've made this promise. And there's this little kind of cock of the head. Okay, let's do this. And then the thing opens up. And that's what carries you through the film. And if you didn't have that, it would just be crash bang wallop monsters, and you'd forget about it in an afternoon.
Yeah, you're dead right. Right.
That is the stuff that resonates, I think, always. And I think going on to sort of thing, because I know AI is in the mix at the moment. I think that is the thing that AI will never be able to replicate because it doesn't feel. It can only imitate feeling. I mean, unless AI becomes sentient, in which case we're all stuffed.
Well, I was reading an article about that earlier where scientists have urged the people that are working on AI just to stop for a second and just think about what happens when we move a bit further along and it does become sentient. I was like, okay, a little bit scary.
It's when AI starts to tell its own sci-fi stories about AI becoming all powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a sort of weird, prophetic, self-fulfilling loop.
Totally.
But then would AI do what we do as humans? Because we have computers and robots trying to take us over. So would then the AI write it that humans are trying to take them over? Like, would just flip it completely?
Trying to hit the power button.
Yeah.
See, that's your next writing project right there.
I mean, no, from that, just those 2 or 3 sentences, that sounded far too complicated.
No, just boil it down. It's
that's very well coming from a man who has people drawing for him that can fill in the gaps. But for us,
well, this is true. Yeah,
do you know
this
what
is
I mean?
true. Do the work for me. Yeah, absolutely.
How does that work in terms of, obviously you have to put in all the story. Is the artist literally just jumping on the back of that and drawing it? Is it that sounds very simplistic?
Oh, they are simple creatures, artists. They're very, very simple creatures. No, you have to just use short words and
just tell them what to do.
Exactly. No, they so there's 2 schools to scripting a comic. There's what they call Marvel style, and there's full script. So Marvel style is, legend has it anyway, goes back to the days when, in the 60s, when you had sort of genius artists, Jack Kirby, and you'd have Stan Lee leaping on his desk going, I've got a great idea about the Thing. And he comes in and this guy, Galactus, comes down. And he would just, all he would write is a synopsis.
Right.
And then that would go to the artist, and the artist would break down that synopsis into pages and panels, and then it would go back to the writer and they would fill in dialogue.
Wow.
I'm seeing this as some like romanticized, like Mad Men, the way that the advertising industry look, that kind of vibe.
No, I mean, I think DC, that's kind of become their house style now. I don't quite know how it would work, but how it works with full script is I will break down the pages and panels. I'll figure out where is the close up, where's the establishing shot, where's this, where's that, and I break it down kind of like a screenplay. But whereas a screenplay is all continuous time, a comic is just break. It's little snapshots. It's single beats, because you can only show one beat of action in a panel. So writing a comic in that way, it tends up being kind of like a sonnet or a haiku. It's all restricted by how many pages you've got. So if you've only got 5 pages and you want to show somebody drawing an arrow from a quiver, then that's one panel of them reaching back to grab an arrow, a second panel of them pulling it out, a third panel of them pulling back the string on the bow, and then the 4th panel of them firing the arrow. It's like, well, that's a page gone.
You've created the worst comic ever, where a man just starts to fire an arrow at the end.
That's it. Yeah, it's a high concept piece, but
takes a really long time to tell a story, though. Yeah,
exactly. But it's so that real estate kind of becomes really precious. But the difference between the two is, like, because it's so crucial, that whole thing about who breaks down the pages and panels, the onus is on the artist in Marvel style, and it is with the writer in full script. And that's all. In 15 years of writing comics, that's the only way I've ever written is full script. I know a lot of people say that there are a lot of similarities between film and comics, but to me, they are completely different languages. You've got comics have got silence and stasis, and movies have got sound and motion. So when you look at a film like 300, which is trying to be as much like the comic as possible, the reason Zack Snyder is slowing down the action is so you can get these tableaus of these gorgeous blokes with 6-packs, like pulling back a spear, and it looks like the panel. Well, now you've got a movie that doesn't really move. You know, and you compare it to sort of a Robert Rodriguez movie or a James Cameron film, where it's just they know how to shoot action that actually moves and hits, you know, rather than this kind of very static stuff. But the place in which movies and comics, to my mind, are identical is with the cut, and it's with the gutter in comics, where you move from one panel to the next, and the reader is filling in the gaps as to what's happened. Oh, I know I've cut to this other scene, or somebody's blinked, or somebody's moved over there. And that's kind of where it comes alive. And I've studied a sort of Walter Murch and sort of editors like that on just how editing works. Because if I'm kind of editing a comic, editing in terms of figuring out what pages and panels I'm going to do, then I'm kind of storyboarding the whole thing to a degree. But at least giving the artist some leeway, saying, look, if you think this is completely crap and doesn't work,
right, that's what I was going to ask.
Then you go for it. And there'll be some artists who just, you know, completely make it their own and will come up with something incredible. But there'll also be stuff like you've got to be really careful with your directions, because I worked with a brilliant German artist called Ingo Roemling on Troll Hunters, based on the DreamWorks series. And I said, the kids walk in with torches, and he drew them with literally burning sticks, like they were chasing Frankenstein's monster down the hill. I was like, no, it's torches. And he went, oh, you mean flashlights? Yeah, flash. Yeah. And there was...
And then when the trolls went to get the 4 candles from the shop,
exactly.
I tell you, I went really wrong.
So it's just about making sure that sort of the artist has got all the dimensions, and just almost like you just kind of putting together IKEA instructions almost, because you may never see that artist again.
So it's quite a fine balance then, isn't it? It's quite a talent
Definitely.
to put enough in there so you get what you want, as it were, but not too much that you're kind of squashing them into a corner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're giving them some leeway. But I find, but the thing is, sometimes, like a lot of the time in 2000 AD, I don't know who the artist is going to be.
Right.
So I won't see that script again until it sees print, and then so I'll look at it and go, Jesus Christ, that could have done with an edit.
What have they done?
Yeah, but it's usually just kind of, well, if I'd known he was going to draw it like that, I would have given that a different line of dialogue, or I would have moved this somewhere. Yeah. But sometimes when you're actually talking to the artist and they're sending you layouts and stuff, then it's, right, so I've now got the time to kind of go back and edit. So there's a little bit of back and forth between there, just kind of helps smooth it out.
Do you ever get an artist like just genuinely thinking they know better and changing the actual story? No one ever goes that far, presumably.
I know of people it's happened to. It hasn't happened to me. I've had artists go a little bit off piste at times, but never like rewriting it. But I
don't like this ending.
Yeah.
We're doing this.
I've heard of like kind of superstar artists who have done that. I go, yeah, I'm not doing that. Artists don't like drawing horses. Apparently, horses, crowds, and dogs. Brilliant. So if I don't like an artist, I'll make sure that it's dogs riding horses in a football stadium. Because artists deserve everything they get. They really do.
And then find out which part of the horse they particularly struggle with, and write close up on horse's face.
I worked with another brilliant artist designer called Piper, and he did I did this gladiatorial sort of horror fantasy story, and I came up with a creature that was several bodies that had been basically lashed together and stitched together into this giant kind of behemoth. So it was a giant made up of several other people. And by the time he'd finished drawing it, he was ready to kill me. He was absolutely ready to kill me.
That sounds like a great challenge. I would have thought most artists would love that.
But I think it's just in the mechanics of like, it's fine you telling me to draw that, but how does that move?
Yeah, you probably enjoy drawing that for the first time, and then you've got to draw it like 20 times.
Exactly, 20 times moving. It's like, how do the joints move exactly? So you've got to, so like there's a sort of sense of design work that they've got to go into as well. But it's kind of like, I'll try not to sort of torture them too much.
That reminds me, I was at Warhammer last week. I was talking to the people who create the audiobooks, and they were singing your praises, by the way. They were saying that you're a great writer to work with.
Oh, jeez, that's nice.
But then they said, when we first started getting scripts from him, there was so much complicated production in them. There was all these sound effects. It'd be like a soldier being waterboarded throughout or something like that.
I remember, because I do this in comic scripts as well, I'll put like little hyperlinks in there. So I remember with one of them, I kept saying, if there was a particular hiss or weird spooky noise, I'd kind of go forward 30 seconds into this weird Slovenian found footage short I found, and there's this
is what I mean,
weird gurgle that comes up, and it's really horrible. It's like that. But I think just with scripts, you're just trying to, because I just never know if I'm ever going to see them again. And I know that they will be suffering from deadline crunch even more than I am. So I don't want them to have to be kind of coming back or just kind of going, what the frig does he mean by this? Or where the hell am I going to find that? So I will always try and do my best to find whatever ref I've just done like a haunted house story for this John Carpenter anthology. And I had to find, okay, what kind of house is it? Right, it's Dutch colonial, New England. It's this. So I went online and I found all the refs. So I put all the ref in the script and gave it to the artist, and he was like, "Oh, thank God for that." So that's just something that they don't have to spend another 6 hours chasing, trying to guess what it is that I'm after. I can just give it to them all in one go, and then they can kind of make it their own kind of thing.
God, after having this discussion with you now, Alec, I can only imagine how disorientating writing that novel must have been for you. In terms of a different process and a different level of control and everything.
I think it's because you're kind of switching between different media, and there is like a day or two where you're just kind of decompressing. You're like, how does this work again? But there was a book that wonderful editor at Black Library recommended to me called The Emotional Craft of Fiction by Donald Mass. 2 A's, 2 S's.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
It is I don't know if I'm just thick, but it was a book that just basically explained to me, this is how fiction actually works. And it was, the thing that I was getting wrong was over description. And he talks in this book about just exactly what is the relationship between the reader and, the fiction. And it's always about meeting them halfway. And because I had come from comics and sort of film, or at least film fandom, and I was thinking very visually, I was always about, right, everything needs to go on the page. If they walk into an Italian restaurant, this is how big it is, and you just over-describe. You don't. You don't. There was a great line Stephen King said, the more I describe my idea of a high school nerd, the more it pushes out the reader's idea of a high school nerd. So you're kind of, you're trying to invite the reader in as much as possible and just meet them halfway. And I mean, there is a spectrum here. And I kind of went back and I read Hemingway. And when I was doing the Warhammer novel, I read a lot of Elmore Leonard. And Elmore Leonard is a disciple of Hemingway. And with Hemingway, he will give you nothing. It feels like he's doing barely anything because he's not giving you anything. He'll do a story like Hills Like White Elephants, which is very, very short story. And if you were to read it literally, if I'd read that when I was 16, I'd go, well, it's just about a couple staring at a hill waiting for a train to turn up. And then when you actually read it properly, it's about a guy who is trying to gaslight his partner into having an abortion. And the words termination don't come up, none of it. It's all left for you to figure it out. But then sort of further down the spectrum, there'll be thriller writers like, Elmore Leonard will hold your hand a little bit more, but a lot of the time he's just inferring, because there was a great TED talk that Andrew Stanton did, one of the Pixar Brain Trust, and he said when he was writing Finding Nemo, he realized what he called the universal theory of 2 + 2. So you don't give the audience 4, you give them 2, you give them another 2, and you let them come up with the 4, rather than just handing it to them.
Right.
So it's just, you're just involving them more, and the reader will feel clever for putting it together in a way. You get that tiny little smidgen of dopamine for kind of, I see what they mean. It's like that scene in 28 Days Later when he walks in the room, he sees the pills, he sees the glass, you're putting it all together in your head, and that's because you're complicit in putting that picture together. It's much more affecting than if you just kind of gone dun 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 and shown you everything, which is what you don't want to do.
No, or even worse, the dreaded exposition of someone that's maybe not as skilled at the craft and has to spell it out. Yeah, just kind of. I mean, the thing is, like, there's always got to be some exposition in there somewhere, and there's kind of, and then it's just how well do you bury it? Yes, I think that's exactly it, isn't it? It's how low key is it,
and if you can build it into explaining the characters and setting the scene and do all of that together, it doesn't feel like exposition, of course.
Exactly. Yeah. There was you remember in Back to Aliens, there was the mission briefing scene that was in Aliens, when it's a classic moment you see in a lot of kind of genre movies. It's very tropey, like when the feds turn up at Indiana Jones's university and give him the mission and off they go. In Aliens, what it does, and you don't even realize the scene is doing it, it's all about the characters and the little power plays that are going on between the characters. So you've got Gorman, who's this lieutenant that nobody really respects. And everyone thinks this is all a little bit of a joke and this is all a little bit silly. And then Ripley comes in and says her thing. And it's just, you're setting up the characters. You're telling the story through the characters rather than just sitting down and saying, here's the mission. We need you to do this by this time. Then go off and do it, which is really boring. You could read that on the back of the VHS or whatever and, off you go. But it's much more affecting to kind of have the characters tell you the story without you even realizing it. And I think that scene is a masterclass in doing that.
You obviously consume a lot of films, and you sound like someone who reads a lot as well. What appeals to you about the fantasy genre? What is it that you like about it?
I don't know. I'm kind of a fantasy horror guy, and I love sci-fi, but I think if I'm honest, I'm probably more onto the kind of action adventure side of sci-fi. But I think I loved it as a kid. And I think you have those kind of emotional connections to those things when you're a kid. But there's something quite therapeutic in all this stuff when you find sort of certain little corners and just being able to play in those worlds and kind of, I do like thinking up, not horrible things, but just creepy things. Like I will literally be up at 2 a.m. and be going, what if this happened? What if you knew the house was empty and you heard footsteps in the attic? Wouldn't that be great to kind of write that and make someone else feel as creeped out as you are in fantasy as well? It's just, it's a great sort of expression for those kind of odd, I don't know, kind of liminal ideas or feelings that you've got. But I mean, fantasy is such a broad genre anyway. It encompasses so many different things, and it
feels like it's something you can do a lot with.
Yeah,
do you know
absolutely.
What I mean? There's very little restriction on what can happen in that space, which I think is quite fun.
There always needs to be a logic in fantasy. I think fantasy is truly, it's just one of the most difficult kinds of stories to get right, I think, because you've got to have such a mastery of tone and also kind of know what the limits are. I'm sure there was a quote from John Cleese when he said that the more crazy and surreal a joke becomes, the more logical it actually has to be. But it's the same thing in fantasy, because drama works on the kind of cause and effect logic. And fantasy kind of doesn't. It's effect without cause. It's pulling a rabbit out of a hat. So you've got to be very careful how you deploy your fantasy effects and your fantasy ideas. And
it's like the wizard problem, isn't it?
Yes,
like
a wizard.
The wizard can just solve every problem. That's the end of the movie,
Exactly. Yeah. I thought that was one of the really clever things that they did with the new Dungeons and Dragons movie, which I thought was an absolute hoot. It's a great film, but it had a very clear idea of what magic could and couldn't do. And it never had a scene where a character pulls out some magical artifact and just solves the scene problem with it. Instead, they have to come up with a way in which to use it creatively that will get them out of trouble. So it's actually the character's ingenuity that is getting them out of the story problem, rather than just relying on that.
Yeah.
Whereas I've never been the greatest fan of the Harry Potter books because they felt too chaotic. It was literally, there's just so many contrivances over and over and over again. It's like, this just doesn't make sense. There's just too much. I know fantasy doesn't have to make sense, but again, it's that you're kind of melding this with tone, and the tone in this just feels like it's being made up on the fly. If it's not abiding in some way to the laws of drama, then I'm not feeling it. You're losing me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's a similar thing with horror. I think one of the big mistakes that always seems to occur in horror is when they don't treat the ghost or the monster like a character.
Yeah.
And I think even if it's a giant shark, you know that the giant shark is going to swim around and eat people. That's its character. That's fine. If it starts
good idea
doing
for a film, that someone should do that.
Great idea. Jeez, that should be the next writing project for sure. Yeah, so going back to Alien, yet again, I mean, you go back to the Alien movies, it's like the creatures in that had a function. It's like, right, they grab people and they glue them to the wall and they turn them into alien babies. That's their function. Whereas in a lot of the later films, they just felt like killing machines.
Yes, yeah.
So it's like, you're not sticking to what the characters do. And in a lot of ghost movies, I remember seeing, I think it was a Kristen Stewart haunted house thing I saw like back when I was doing film reviews. And the ghost can write spooky messages in the mirror, but the ghost wants you to find the body that's in the backyard. So why doesn't he just write, can you please dig up my bones in the backyard, please? Because I would like to rest now.
Yeah.
It's treating it logically rather than just as a device for scares. Kind of thing.
Well, and that happens in all kinds of films, doesn't it? It's the old, I've got something important to tell you. Not now. Yeah. I'm going somewhere else. In that case, I just won't say it. I mean, I could say it now while we're still here and force you to listen, but we'll leave it till later in the film. Yeah.
Yes, when I might be dead.
Yeah.
Do you know what would be the greatest fantasy? The story of Tom and I finishing our books, cause we need a minor miracle for a feat so lyrical. Probably shouldn't be so cynical. If we had the drive, we could truly thrive. We would really rise up, keep our writing dreams alive. But when the time arrives, I predict a slow nose dive. I suspect that we'll just skive.
I wanted to ask you, Alec, we sometimes like to perform like a little writing task based on our non-failing professional writer guest.
Yeah.
That we will then, go away and write and maybe encourage our listeners to have a go at too. And then we'll present them to each other maybe in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Can you come up with a little task for us? That we'll have to...
Sort of something fantasy or?
Yeah, something exactly. Fantasy, sci-fi fantasy.
How about pick up a copy of New Scientist or Wired and find a technology story or piece of news that hits you for some reason emotionally. Just makes you go, oh, geez, that's interesting. What would happen if...
And extrapolate it.
Yeah, and then just come up with a log line based on that, a premise. So it's like, think about what kind of person would be best placed to dramatize that story. What's the line of action? What's the counteraction? What are the stakes? And just come up with a sci-fi concept, almost like a Black Mirror episode.
I like that. That's good.
Great. Something like that.
That, annoyingly though, that'll give us another thing we have to write.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing.
That's what I'm trying to do.
What you mean after you've done the log line, go, that's a good idea. We should write that.
Yeah. You can't just leave a log line, can you?
You should write that. Yeah.
That's
totally.
good. Yeah. Brilliant. We'll take that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I don't really know what is going on apart from everything's about AI at the moment.
It is at the minute, isn't it?
It's madness. It's getting into
that's because the robots are writing all the news articles,
Do you know what? If you're good at what you do and you can make readers feel something, like AI can't do that. It can only ever imitate it. The thing is, I think the degree to which AI writing will take hold is going to depend on the degree to which audiences are going to accept it. And I think they will accept it. I think we've already paved the way. I mean, like,
I think they will. Yeah,
you've got. I mean, look, you've got the the Super Mario Brothers movie. It's taken like 700 million worldwide. It's a 90-minute advert for Nintendo. It's. I sort of sometimes feel as well like I really do think there will be a greater value placed on those writers who've got some kind of voice, who, like you say, can just bring some kind of nuance to the party because people want to connect with human beings. Yeah,
I think it's happened before, and it's all circular and what have you, isn't it? With automated machines producing things. Yeah, we love that because we get lots of things cheap. But if you want a proper musical instrument, you want it crafted by a dude that knows his wood.
Exactly.
That can talk to the wood. So there's always going to be a demand for it, isn't it? It's just,
I don't get how we're letting the computers do all the fun stuff as well.
It's all the creative stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's what we live for. This was not what we were shown in the old sci-fi movies, was it? It was robots bringing me my tea.
Yeah.
That's what should be happening.
Exactly.
They're not interested in the tea.
Don't be writing my books.
It's weird, like the dystopia that I kind of expected when I was a teenager hasn't quite come about. It's gone in a different direction. I kind of thought we'd be living in a Paul Verhoeven RoboCop movie, which we kind of are, but it's also kind of Philip K. Dick as well. It's just a lot more surreal and strange. It's like, do androids dream of electric sheep? It's just, I look at things like Instagram now and I'm just, every time I see an image, is that real? I don't know. And I haven't got time to look up whether it is.
And even if it is real, it's not necessarily real because someone's made it to look real, to paper over the cracks of their flimsy, empty life to make it look like it's not. So other people who have actually half-decent lives think that their lives aren't. It's just a whole awful whirlwind.
Your eyes are just sort of skimming over it. I think AI is hurting artists now more immediately than it is writers. But I mean, straight away, I know there was a couple of sci-fi fiction magazines, Clark's World and I think Grimdark magazine. They got flooded with AI submissions. And so they just had to shut down like their submission windows because they physically couldn't take the... So it's like, well, what do you do then? I mean, I don't know how this is... I mean, presumably that's just from people who are trying to make a quick buck.
Well, it is, yeah. Just people that think, Well, there's you find it on the internet. There's how-to guides.
Oh, man, yeah.
During kind of like get-rich-quick things, idea 3.
Yeah.
Write a novel. You don't have to write anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that was great.
Look, it's been really lovely. Thanks so much for having me on, man.
Oh, we really appreciate your time, mate. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolute pleasure.
And John, thank you so much for doing such a great job on Dredge Runners. That was brilliant.
Oh, you're welcome.
Edit that bit.
I think I'll edit this one, actually. Make a little montage at the end there.
So that was Alec Worley. Thanks for joining us, Alec. And we've put the links in our show notes. You can find out more on his website, alecworley.com. But there's links to his Substack and his website and all sorts of stuff.
He has a brilliant blog
called
Agent of Weird, which is really good. Lots of insight in that.
Yeah, it's like it gets signed up to his newsletter.
And going back to ghost stories,
yeah.
I came across one he wrote last year called The 4 Techniques of a Truly Scary Horror Comic.
Oh, yeah.
And interestingly, he talks about some of the things that we discussed with Stephen Volk and Kieran O'Keefe about ghost stories and how to get that feeling of unease. So that might be quite a good one to read as well before you write your ghost story. So check that out. Link in the show notes.
You're doing a lot of research on writing your spooky story. You're going for treating it quite seriously.
I am, yeah. Are you? Have you started writing it yet?
I've not kind of.
Not kind of.
I've been doing research.
All right, call it that. That's good.
I mean, there's a lot, yeah.
Well, that's what I've been doing.
Yeah. A lot of research.
Good. Well, it'll be amazing though, won't it? It's obviously going to be amazing.
Yeah. Definitely.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Definitely.
And what were we thinking at the end of that interview, Tom? Rather, it wasn't you, was it? It was me again. What was I thinking? Giving us another task.
It was only a little task, to be fair.
It was a little task. Again, it did involve a bit of research, though.
Yeah, well, now, this is where we're at with this. You've done yours in the last, 20 minutes, John? You've kind of forgot.
I forgot
not done your homework, and then...
Yeah. So I got like half an idea. But I did the research bit of it.
Right, okay.
On the train yesterday. I just didn't... I forgot to do the actual...
I'm just going to be a bit annoyed if yours is significantly better than mine.
I think you'll be all right.
I don't know. It's not really... It's funny. It's just not my... I enjoy sci-fi stuff. But yeah, it's...
But not necessarily coming up with it.
Yeah, maybe not. Well, I guess we'll find out, won't we? But yeah.
I think it's such a deep genre in the sense that there's so much stuff, obviously, that's been done already.
Yeah.
That I'm just not aware of.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's the kind of thing that you're probably doubling, if not tripling, quadrupling up on.
Oh, completely.
Lots of other people's ideas. But if you're deep into sci-fi, you know all this is like, this is a rubbish idea.
But then it's another one of these genres where you need to tick a certain amount of boxes.
Yeah.
It needs to have so many tropes, or it needs to resonate with the existing... Do you remember when we spoke to Stuart Turton? And he said the same about kind of the whodunit murder mystery thing.
Yeah.
That you can't just go off completely off piste and go somewhere random with it.
Yeah.
It needs to have X, Y, and Z in it.
Yeah.
Now you can get from X, Y, and Z in different ways, or you can put a different spin on it, or a different set of clothes on the whole thing. But it needs to be, people are reading it and they need to have those boxes ticked somewhere.
Yeah, they've got expectations. And if you don't fulfill them, people get upset.
And I think the sci-fi thing's the same. Yeah, there's some sort of bendable but not breakable rules and tropes in there, I think. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm sticking to. So when you say, Tom, isn't that just a weird mishmash of every like 80s sci-fi film with a little bit of Demolition Man thrown in? Is it that? Yeah. I go, those are the tropes, John. That's how you have to do it.
That's what people want.
Yeah.
I think mine might suffer from a similar thing. So where did you start, Tom? What was your...
Well, I went a little bit John with this.
Wow.
Which is never good, is it? That's not, you don't want to be coming out of anything thinking you've done that.
What a starting point. Yeah,
so I just deleted it. So I've, I thought, God, this is... No, it's kind of come out as a very long... It's not a log line. It's several paragraphs.
Right. It's a concept.
It's almost like, basically, if you watch any 1980s sci-fi film, like Blade Runner or whatever, they always start, don't they, with text. They always like set out the...
Yes, because there's a lot to explain, isn't there?
Here's the year.
Yeah.
Here's the name of the evil corporation. Here's what's happened. There's a war or some kind of imbalance of power or some massive natural disaster. And that's why everyone's gone Mad Max. That's why everyone's living on the moon. That's why there's replicants. That's why whatever. This is basically like the text.
All right. Okay.
So this is where I went with it. It's 2083. So I thought I'd set it in the future, John.
That's clever.
Good sci-fi trick, that. If anyone's listening, want to write some sci-fi, I've set mine in the future. It's interesting, isn't it? You kind of pick that. It needs to be a future day that is within touch of our society, but is far enough away that lots of things will have changed.
Yes, and it can never be a round number either.
Well, I did. I've
gone
gone for
the 2080, can it?
No, I've gone for the generic 50 years from this year.
Yes.
Although I think I should have, maybe I should have gone for 2084. That sounds better, doesn't it?
Oh gosh, it does. That's so much better. We're
going to bump it forward here.
Yeah.
It's 2084. Human art has become illegal, John.
Ooh.
AI has taken over everything, including the creative arts. The government has made it clear that AI needs to dominate all output from news to games, entertainment, art, in order to maintain balance to the new economy, and so they can maintain control.
I see.
In this society, the government claims that their ideal is that everyone is equal. Most receive a set universal income and people have time for their families and their state-required recreation. They are told they are happy and living in utopia, and many of them now believe it. There are, of course, some jobs that still need performing by humans, but they are reducing every year. There is an underclass of people that perform these jobs, the workies, many of which aspire to move up into the Ristos class and live, as they see it, a life of leisure and freedom. News is generated, some of it with a strand of truth. Video is created with AI. History is created with AI. Nothing is real. It's time that someone rock the boat. One man, John, steps forward. The grandson of Banksy. He is an illegal artist with an unstoppable urge to create. He's an artistic terrorist. Initially, he's just a rebel without a cause. But when he gets in trouble for his graffiti, it's also probably taking a bit in from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, this, isn't it, which is less sci-fi. When he gets in trouble for his graffiti, he gets sent to live with his auntie and uncle. No, he doesn't. He can't help but want to know more. So he kind of sees a little chink, sees it from the inside. And as he fights the system, he breaks down the facade and realises that the whole government is now just AI.
Oh, yeah.
Has AI completely taken over, or is someone sat in their Wizard of Oz tower directing it all? He plans to find out, but when he does discover the truth, he has a choice to make. Become part of the system and live in blissful ignorance, or try and bring the whole system crashing down. A little bit Matrix in there. If he fails, he won't just lose his freedom and possibly his life, but society loses its soul once and for all. But if he succeeds, life could become harder for many, but fairer for most. So it's very much a comment on capitalism and communism and AI and, you know, the moral dilemma of who's in control and who's going to use it for their power, and is it still about subjugating a class of people? But mostly it's just based on Demolition Man and The Matrix and The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Yeah, and Demolition Man, of course, was based on Brave New World, which is probably based on something else. I really like that, Tom. I think that's excellent. I mean, it's classical, isn't it?
It is quite classical.
It's very classical.
If we could go back the other way and back in time 50 years, that'd be getting snapped up.
Without doubt. I love the idea because now you can create video content entirely just through AI. I love the idea that the government are basically just AI videos created to please the population. That's wonderful. That's
the thing in this. You'd be kind of like getting to the top, and it's like, is it all just AI? Have AI actually taken over? Or is there someone still at the top? Some mastermind, some Wizard of Oz type.
I do like that.
So it kind of brings in.
Wow, that's really good, Tom. I love that. Just out of interest, did you Google the idea and see if someone's written a book like that already?
No, I didn't, because if you notice, it's kind of lots of ideas. So it's so spread out that obviously someone will, but you couldn't really put your finger on what idea it's been stolen from.
The key idea is really that AI is fundamentally controlling everything.
Yeah, I think that's been done quite a lot, though, hasn't it? That's a well-worn path in one way or another, from RoboCop to...
I know what you're saying.
But then it's usually a corporation, isn't it, that's been headed by an evil...
like Terminator or something, and then the robots have killed all the people. Yeah. But the fact that the people don't realise they're being controlled by AI...
A little bit Matrix, that, isn't it?
Yeah, true. Yeah, I mean, well done, though, for combining all those so efficiently. That's really good. I don't know how you steer clear of existing ideas in sci-fi.
It's impossible to some extent, isn't it?
I think it might be a little bit impossible. I suppose it's the same with Westerns and things, isn't it? How are you not going to borrow some of those stories?
Yeah.
It's really, really difficult. I read an article on the train yesterday in December's issue of BBC Science Focus magazine about anti-aging, biogerontology, which talked about there's a lot of excitement around the development of senolytic drugs at the moment. I don't know if you know about this, but these drugs target senescent cells, what are known as zombie cells, which, and this is all real, by the way, which as you age kind of accumulate in your body. They're cells that they don't die. They're just sort of shut down, and they just sort of exist in you, and that's what causes you to slowly deteriorate. But scientists are already testing senolytic drugs. They've done lots of animal tests on them already, but they are starting to test them on humans. And in theory, they should actually reverse aging, not just slow aging.
Oh, right, okay.
But actually make you younger.
I'm interested now, because I always get a bit annoyed at these anti-aging things. You think, well, brilliant, stop me while I'm old now.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I started looking into it a bit more, and some scientists actually think we might end up living like over 200 years, which is mental.
Yeah.
So I thought, what would happen if, I suppose with aging populations, it would mean that old people could continue working. So that would be good for economies that are, struggling under the burden of massive pensions and things. But I'm kind of assuming that those therapies aren't going to be cheap.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It would probably be the ruling classes. They'd probably be the only ones who had the financial means to actually use them to stay young. And I was thinking you could end up with a sort of two-tier society where you have a very select group of powerful elders who run the world.
Yeah.
And or just hold on to their jobs. Do you know what I mean? And never retire. So it would be even harder than it already is to kind of infiltrate the corridors of power, if you like. And I was thinking that, you'd have a load of young people getting really pissed off that all these old bastards are hogging all the good jobs, And I thought, and people would have to eventually confront the what is still a very sort of taboo subject about global population, because the population presumably would massively swell if there's a generation of people just suddenly not dying.
Yeah.
The government might set up secret cull squads to keep the population down, finding ways of secretly killing people off. Look, I've not had time to hone this.
No, I'm getting. It's like wine tasting, isn't it? This.
It's like wine tasting.
Yeah. These sci-fi ideas. Yeah, okay. I'm getting Blade Runner. Am I getting Blade Runner?
Yes, the Blade Runner did pop into my head. Yeah, exactly.
Altered Carbon. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. Getting quite a bit of that.
No, what's that?
That's it's kind of anti-aging in that their consciousness gets uploaded, like digitized, and then is re-implanted into I think they call it re-sleeving into new bodies.
Right. Yeah. A bit like Get Out as well.
Mm.
Yeah. But hey, listen, this is what I was thinking. I was thinking we could brainstorm it together, because for a good log line, you need the basic problem, and then you need a main character who's kind of going to be the absolute worst person ever to try and solve that problem.
Yeah.
So here's my starting point, right? And I thought we could have a little, see what we came up with together. At the moment, I'm calling it the Zombie Cell.
Mm.
Nigel Beringer, nerdy scientist heading up the UK's National Biogerontology Department, is tipped off from something or somewhere about a government agency secretly culling members of the population who are no longer considered useful to society. And those people are mainly the people who are a threat to the current ruling classes, because they're the people who hope to take over the jobs that the elders are currently hogging. Nigel reluctantly infiltrates one of these cool squads who call themselves zombie cells. And then what happens? What's his issue? Why is it just that he's nerdy? And
well, would he have the turning point where he's willing to walk away from it because it's above his pay grade and he's not a hero? And then it's got to affect him directly, hasn't it? It's got to be a family member or a...
Yes, it has. It's got to be something that draws him in.
He can no longer refute. He can't turn a blind eye to it.
Exactly. So
he kind of accidentally stumbles into it and then wants to just go, oh, it's not well, they're probably doing it for the right reasons. He toes the line very easily, doesn't he? Because he's a
little dweeby guy.
But then his grandma or whatever, I don't know who they're getting rid of. Bit Logan's Run in there as well, if I may say.
Yeah.
Culling the old folk.
But they might not be culling the old folk. It might be the old folk culling the young.
Just the undesired.
Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Because the old folk are like looking at the young ones going, oh, we've got to get rid of them.
Because they know nothing. Yeah, they're coming up.
They're young. They're stupid.
Yeah.
They're trying to take our jobs. They're pissed off. They're dangerous. The young people.
Yeah.
So that could be how it works. Like the older.
So he needs someone close to him that it becomes a potential victim or a victim. Maybe we go straight for the.
Yeah, that's even better, isn't it? In fact, that's where you start the whole thing.
He tries to save them and fails.
Yes. And then he's in.
And then he's angry.
Yeah.
Now it's turned into a Liam Neeson movie as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He just slowly.
It's a revenge flick.
It's a John Wick. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just slowly goes through them, right up to the big boss man, who it turns out is just AI.
Oh, get out of my story! Come on.
Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he doesn't kill them. Maybe he turns them against the system by promising to help them stay young too. Because he's a scientist.
Yeah, it'd be nice at the end then, wouldn't it, to have him he kind of manages to win somehow. And then he's left with that technology in his own hands.
Oh, yeah.
And he has to decide whether he's going to use it or not.
And then there's like a cut scene, and then the words come up 10 years later, and it cuts back.
Yeah, that's a good one, yeah.
In a little nappy.
It's just a little baby, big smile on his face, just playing on the beach or something.
Yeah.
Nigel!
Hey, I mean, we got somewhere with that, didn't we?
Yeah.
It's not bad.
Yeah. Like I say, 50 years ago, film studios, early 70s film studios would have been absolutely snapping those up.
Oh, definitely. Hey, do you know where we've got to now, Tom? And we can't avoid it anymore. We want to, but we can't avoid it.
Is it time for the question, John?
It's time for the question, Tommy.
It has been a long time since we even asked the question.
I think we had an understanding, didn't we?
There's unspoken
agreement, yeah.
You go first, then.
Do you want to? I was going to say, do you want to toss for it, heads or tails?
I mean, you were the one that set the stupid arbitrary deadline, wasn't it?
Okay. Do you want the good news or the bad news?
I would just like good news, John.
All right. Well, there is good news.
Honestly, I am genuinely going to be disappointed.
Well, look, I've got some good news.
Good.
I don't know if you remember me saying way back when I said I reckon the book will end up being about 85,000 words.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is I have written 85,000 words.
Hold on. Yeah, go on. Is it finished?
No, I am genuinely really near the end,
So
but I haven't quite. No, do you know what? It's really kind of annoying because it feels like the closer I get to the end, the further away the end is. Like just getting. Do you remember? Do you remember the Travelator at the end of the obstacle course on the Gladiators show?
Yes.
The 90s show Gladiators.
Going up quite at like 45 degrees.
A steep conveyor belt.
Yeah.
Exactly. It feels a bit like that. It feels like you're so close to the end, but you're just being pushed back the whole time.
Yeah.
But I am really close. So I have failed. I will admit that I failed. But I have done 15,000 words and almost finished a book.
Well, that's good.
And I reckon I'll get it done. If not in a week's time, maybe just a little bit longer. But I should be done for a Christmas episode, which is something. It's not what I set out to do, but it is word count wise.
Yeah, that's true.
So
yeah, that's good.
I feel all right about it. It's really, I tell you what as well, it's been really hard. That last little bit, the final sort of denouement, I found incredibly difficult because, of course, you've actually got to be quite clever about how you put the ending together, so it's really satisfying. Do you know what I mean? And there have to be surprises in there, and you almost need to surprise yourself. And I haven't quite connected all the dots.
I'm just thinking back to, this was probably towards the start of season 1 when we discussed this. Your slight medical issue you have with sitting, writing and thinking, where you tend to fall asleep if you think too hard.
Yeah.
Was there a lot of that going? Have you had like quite a lot of little...
I've actually been all right. Yeah, I've not been bad. I've probably nodded off a couple of times.
Yeah, because that will slow things down, that. When you go, yes, I've hit my word count.
Yeah.
Oh no, all the last words were because you've fallen asleep on the keyboard. Oh, that's pretty good.
It's better than pretty good, Tom.
Yeah, it's very good.
Slightly better than pretty good.
And like you said, the end bit, you are tying all these different bits together, and it's
like you've nearly finished the jigsaw, and
you've just left all the bits of completely blue sky to do.
No, you can't find the last two pieces. But you know that know they're there somewhere. They're probably under the table, or they've been kicked under the couch. But you're so close. You've just got to dig them out, pop them in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Tom.
Yeah.
The question to you.
Right. Well, I think it's fair to say mine didn't go very well, and it's your fault.
All right, that's interesting.
Because I was doing quite well and knocking off 1,000 words here, a couple of 1,000 words there, and then you came up with this idea of finishing it by the end of the month.
So I gave you an excuse to fail.
You the deadline suddenly was too far in the future. I was kind of rattling along, and then because you put that deadline, I thought, oh well.
Hang on a minute,
I'm pretty
Tom.
close to the end here. I don't need to do anything.
You were struggling before that.
I did finish it.
Of course.
Which feels, I mean, it's great that I finished it. Obviously, it's like less than half the length of yours, with it being a kid's book. But it got finished.
But it's done. And how do you feel about it? Have you read it back through?
I haven't read it back through yet, so that's give it a couple of weeks. And I mean, it's very first drafty, I have to say.
Yeah.
But
that's fine.
I'm quite proud of myself for finishing that, because normally that's where I would get caught up.
Yeah.
In going back and starting editing and changing and trying to.
Yeah. And then inevitably get fed up with it and give up.
Talking about your end bit there, tying everything together, obviously there's not the same number of threads to tie up in the kids' book.
But it's still got to be clever, hasn't it? Presumably at the end. It's got
there still needs to be a denouement of some description. I just kind of blasted through it.
Oh, nice.
I did the right thing for once and thought, do you know what? It's not perfect. It's not right. There's a few gaps there.
Yeah.
But just kind of
you just need to have something on the page, don't you?
Put all the foundations in place to be able to go back, knowing that some of it will go in the bin and some of it will become something else.
Yeah.
What I did find quite interesting, and with no planning to do this, so there's kind of two main characters in it, and the subtext of the story is about
this
their
is the
friend.
Girl and the genie?
No, the girl and her best friend,
right?
Who's more... so the girl is a very selfish girl, and the whole point of the story, I guess, is that she works out that that's not how you're meant to be a friend, and so they have a bit of their friendship equals out to become more equitable and happier. But sort of halfway through the story, it switches from being from Girl 1's perspective.
Oh, right. Nice.
And Girl 1 sort of drops out the story, because then we go with Girl 2.
That's good. I like that.
It is. It's quite a nice way of getting inside their heads each time as well, to then put the pieces together to say, this is how they're friends or not, or this is why it's...
Yeah.
This is why Girl 2 needs to stick up for herself a bit more in this relationship.
Yeah. I think it's a good... Yeah, that can work very well as a mechanic.
Yeah, it's quite nice that it happened organically, I think, as well, rather than thinking, oh, that'd be good, and trying to force it into a... So it's quite nice that it's from Girl 1's perspective, then it goes to Girl 2's, and then at the end it's them together, because they've found their togetherness.
I think it also can refresh a story.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You're going down a certain path, and it's like... blah, 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 you kind of know what's coming to a certain extent, and then to change it completely is quite nice, like a new scene.
It just gives a bit of different voice and different expected actions of the character, doesn't it, as well, of what might happen.
Yeah.
But loads needs changing, absolutely. But
so it's in the drawer
it's
at the
in
moment.
the metaphorical drawer, yeah. I did say what I would do is get it out and read it to my daughter.
Oh, yeah. Although you probably want to read a more developed version, although it would be good to get the feedback, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think just to read it through.
Yeah, no, she'd probably love that, wouldn't she?
Yeah,
good shout.
Yeah, that's going to start this weekend. I think we'll get cracking on with it.
Oh, nice.
So yeah.
Hey, Tom, blimey, took us long enough.
It did, and it wouldn't have taken me as long if you hadn't have set a deadline. Bizarrely, it did work in the end. I did most of that in the last 3 days of the month.
There you go.
So that's another finished. I mean, not finished, but
yeah.
It's
another step towards being finished.
She's done something, isn't it? Yeah.
I feel like we should celebrate, Tom.
The steady on.
It's a bit early for that, isn't it?
We've got some Christmas spooky stories to write first.
Oh yeah, there's that as well. I'm about halfway through, I reckon.
Are you keeping under the word limit? Okay, because I know you have a propensity to wander a bit longer sometimes.
Should we find that out in a couple of weeks?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Let's.
Yeah.
Let's
just say I was feeling a little bit guilty when you were giving our listeners, you were telling them to keep it under 1,000 words.
Wow, so you're like one rule for them.
Okay.
Speaking about sci-fi split worlds with people with privilege and those kept
that's right,
under the thumb and underneath.
Yeah. Well, we got the power, you see. We got all the power.
Yeah. The year is 2058. Only some are permitted to use lots of words in their writing.
That's how we
Absolutely. Oh, and we should mention before we go that we have got a very special guest.
Oh my God, we have got a very special guest
for the Christmas Spookathon.
A little bit overexcited about that, to be honest. Find out in 2 weeks' time.
Next time, yeah.
Yeah.
On Christmas.
On Christmas Day.
Is it actually on Christmas Day?
It's on Christmas Day. I think so.
Oh, my
Are we doing
goodness.
gifts?
I don't know if we. No, I don't know. No. I've not planned this. All I can think is that literally no one will listen to it because they'll probably have other things to do. But that's fine. It's fine.
No, they'll have naught to do.
That's true. Yeah, there's that weird bit in the afternoon, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone's got excited, open the presents.
That's it. King's speech.
Grandma's comatose with a sherry, and now it's just a little bit of a weird...
The liminal time.
Yeah.
Take that liminal time and have a little listen to some spooky stories.
Well, basically, you're either going to have to watch a Morecambe and Wise rerun, a Wallace and Gromit film, pick any of them, or listen to us.
To be fair, they're all...
I think we got a reasonable chance.
No, they're quite good things, Tom. We don't want to go up against them. Well, listen, I'm looking forward to that. So we would love to hear your stories.
Yes,
genuinely.
yeah.
If you want to send them, failingwriterspodcast@gmail.com. Get them sent over.
But do remember, you lot have to keep them under 1,000 words.
Yeah.
Because you're not as important as John.
Exactly.
Okay?
Yeah, if you could. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that just about concludes our business here.
That does indeed conclude today's podcasting.
Excellent.
And we will see our listeners. We will hit no, they'll hear
I don't
us.
know what you're talking about now, Tom. So I'm just going to turn it off.
Episode.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Hello.
Hello.
Where's everybody gone? Where's everybody gone? Where's everybody gone? Where's everybody gone?